and I'm going to make an apologies. So we actually got started this morning prematurely. Well, no, we started on time. It's just the recording got started retardedly. So I'm doing a little catch up here. What we're doing is we're just evaluating some statements, and we're determining whether or not they are, whether they fit the criteria of a non-judgmental observation, or whether they are indeed an observation that is based on on a judgment or an opinion, a value, and so on and so forth. And this gets into our observing just the facts, The first part of the four-part formula for nonviolent communication. So the next statement, the store was very crowded this morning. The store had 10 people in it this morning.
That's tricky, right? Because if you say something like the store is very crowded, I can use statistical analysis to tell you, well, on any given Sunday at 8 a.m., this is how many people I should expect. So if that's a plus 3 sigma event, right? Then maybe
there's certainly that way of looking at it. There's also the way that, if there were 10 people in the store this morning, you as a customer might not think that's very crowded because it's a huge Walmart. However, from the store manager's perspective, who normally sees no one, 10 people might indeed be a crowd in, a convenience store or something like that. Since I didn't identify the store, we don't really know. There are many ways that we could make an evaluation, but that does lead us to suggest which of them might be a factual-based observation and an observation based on opinion, judgment, and so on and so forth. Guess, anyone? Anyone? The store was very crowded this morning, and one statement, and another statement, the store had 10 people in it.
First one's opinion, second one's observational.
Yeah, the second one is just the facts, just the fact. Now, it may or may not be true. There might have been 12 people, or 11, or only 9, but that is something that could be verified. Whereas the store is very crowded, as Neil pointed out, as I pointed out, could be analyzed from several different perspectives and would be a value-based judgment or a value-based observation based on which perspective we're looking at. So we're inserting ourself, or someone's inserting themselves into the observation, their perspective on things, okay? So are we kind of seeing what we're looking for here? Neil, I know you weren't part of the first 2 sessions, although perhaps you listened to the recordings or something. But okay, so let's try again. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Okay, the building was 20 stories. The building was rather small. We're talking about the same building, by the way. The building was 20 stories. The building was rather small. Which of them would qualify as a factual-based observation, a fact-only-based observation? True or false, we could check, but that's not the point here. It's factual-based observation, and the other one's an opinion or judgment-based observation.
One is verifiable, the other one is opinion.
Yeah, so which one is which?
20 is verifiable.
Okay.
Right.
Small is opinion.
And in New York City, a 20-story building would be rather small.
So an anecdote to that point, I was reading this weekend really quickly about the Singer building, the old Singer building in New York, which for about a year was the tallest building in the world. And it was rather tall. It was nearly a 700-foot building, but it was actually, it was a small building in the sense that they didn't build a giant skyscraper. It was basically, there was a base and they had offset a tower, right?
Yeah.
And eventually they tore it down because it was a small, tall building. It was actually very cost ineffective. So
Yeah.
I just thought I'd share that for.
Yeah, I mean, square footage wise, floor space wise, per floor, it might be very small. The condo that I worked in Hawaii was 32 stories. And, I used to think, wow, that's huge. I mean, I'm from New Orleans, and we didn't have tall buildings in New Orleans because they'd sink. I mean, the city's underwater to begin with. And so, that's why people didn't have, if you had a swimming pool, you could never leave it empty because it would float up and crack. You always had to have water. So coming from New Orleans and much of the South in the late 60s and early 70s, 30-story building was rather tall. And so I worked in this 32-story condominium. That's where I owned a condominium, in fact. And I worked there as an apartment manager. And there were only 8 condos on each floor. It wasn't very big, square footage wise, but it was tall. And but by New York standards, and even to some degree by Charlotte standards, 32-story building is not significant at all. And I don't know, I imagine Raleigh's pretty much the same way. 32-story building is maybe average.
Well, Raleigh's downtown is not actually that impressive, actually.
Okay. Well, Charlotte, 32 stories is not very, it's not very significant. And Trey, I'm guessing in Tuscaloosa there that 32 stories would really stand out. But in Mobile, perhaps not.
Probably not so much.
Yeah. So it's a relative, the building was small, or it's a relative statement, could be tall. All right, so you get the kind of idea is that you listen for things that are not subjective. And we can use this tool when we speak, of course, and we're describing things. We try to stick to the facts and remove our subjective opinions from things when we're trying to communicate nonviolently. And most of my examples in the previous recordings have all been negative things, but it might be positive things. Maybe someone says something nice to you and you hear, wow, when I heard you say you liked my shirt, last week I talked about the shirt didn't go well with you, but when I heard you say you liked my shirt, I felt good. Thank you. I welcome those kinds of compliments anytime, So we have the same thing. We hear something, and it's not always negative. Sometimes it's positive, and sometimes or somebody did something. Wow, you washed all the dishes. That's very nice. I feel very good. Thank you. Or I'm very appreciative. Thank you. And how can we make this continue? How can I get to do that more often? So we, this works two ways. It works at understanding conflict, and it works also in encouraging connection. So someone does something and you want it to continue, that's your encouraging connection, or you want this good feeling to continue or to be mutual. Wow, you did that for me. That made me feel real good. I have a need to return the favor. What can I do for you that would be equally good for you, or feel equally well, whatever. You get the idea. So, my examples in the past have been primarily dealing with negative, because that's kind of what I was thinking about. But then I got to thinking, that I don't want anybody to think that this is only about negative stuff. This is about how do we continue good stuff. Okay, so I'm going to share with you today. So last week I talked about feelings. And this week we're going to talk about needs. And so, okay, you may or may not be able to see this, and I can share it. I'm sharing it on the screen. Okay, and when I get done here, let's see, I can't. Okay, so you just have to kind of look on the screen there. So it's a universal needs list, and as it notes at the top, this list builds on Marshall Rosenberg, who is the founder of Nonviolent Communication, by the way, original needs list with categories adapted from Manfred Max Neef. And this list is provided only as a tool for study, and no list is a substitute for each one of us finding our truth using our own words that fit our experience. So this list is not to be, it's not to be felt or thought of as an exclusive and all-inclusive list of all needs that you could possibly feel. And if you felt a need that wasn't on this list, there's nothing wrong with you. So this list is, all the lists are just meant to be tools to help us identify and understand ourselves more fully. So as we saw with the feelings list, it had the potential of expanding our vocabulary, giving us new words to talk about our feelings that can actually offer a little bit more clarification on what we're feeling, clarification to ourselves and clarification to the people we're communicating with. And the same way with this needs list, a lot of us sometimes may not understand what our needs are. We feel uncomfortable. We're not quite sure about the discomfort, and we're not quite sure about how to describe what we need to make that discomfort go away. So this is part of the nonviolent communication. We had the observation, the feelings, OF, and this week we talk about N, needs. And so if we just take a look at this a little bit, and I'm tilting the screen so that with my trifocals I can get it in the middle slot and read it a little bit better. So substance and security, physical sustenance, food, air, health, movement, you know, the ability to move freely, international borders inhibits that to some degree. You go to Europe, and now with the EU, you could travel from one country to another and never even know that you've crossed the border practically. I experienced this several times when I was in Spain for a conference and then went to France, and then when I was in Belgium and went to France from a conference. And one year when I went from Luxembourg to France to Spain and back to France again, it's like nobody cared. You're just on the train and you just go. We used to be able to go to Canada freely. I remember when I lived in San Diego, just walk across the border to Tijuana and then walk back. And all you had to do was at the border, just say you're an American and pass. And now you can't do that without a card. Or I have the card for Canada and the passport for every place else in the world. We've got the immigrants from everywhere come to our border, and we used to have a little bit more welcoming policy, and now we've restricted people's travel, so their movement. Physical safety, we have a need for physical safety. We all want to feel safe. Rest, sometimes that's our need, is, I just need some rest. Shelter, I need to get out of the rain. I need to get warm. Touch, water. How many of us think about, I need to be touched. I need to be held. I need to be comforted. Yes, no? It's not an obvious one necessarily. And maybe even depending upon what generation you're from, whether or not you want to be touched. May even depend on what your experience is growing up, whether or not you feel safe being touched. And certainly who is doing the touching would be an issue too. So, you can't, but unless you know this need, then you may not be able to articulate, and you may have an unmet need. Unmet needs lead to dissatisfaction and unhappiness. So maybe you have a need not to be touched and someone's touching you. I had that experience a couple of weeks ago. I was with someone who was, for lack of an articulate way of putting it, they were more gay than I am. And they were quite, they were like touching all the time. And I mean, it was a guy, sure, but I felt uncomfortable with, his touches. And they weren't sexual. They were just friendly. And, I could say maybe they're typical of some younger gay people. I don't want to, prejudice or categorize people unfairly. It's just an observation as an older person. In my generation, we just really didn't do that. And so I'm uncomfortable with it. And I had a need for him to stop. But I also had a need to keep the peace. And the need to keep the peace was greater than the need to not be touched. And so I allowed him to keep touching my leg and patting me on the hand. And because I knew his intentions were good and were just different generations. And the need for connection overrode the need to not be touched. So sometimes we make trade-offs like that. And I offer that not as a critique against anything, but just as an example of sometimes we have to make compromises with ourselves. Sometimes we're maybe so conflicted, we have so many different needs that have to be addressed all at once, that we really need the time to think about, okay, which one has priority here? Anything going off in anybody's head right now? Anything triggering, anything rumbling around, any uncertainties, any experiences of this, personal experiences?
I have a similar experience that has to do with being, touched or, like having a need to not be touched.
So hold on one second, Trey. So I'm having difficulty hearing you. And I don't know if it's just me. I have my volume all the way up. So I'm going to ask if you could sit closer to your microphone.
All right. Can you hear me better now?
Oh, yes. Much better. Thank you.
All right. I have a experience myself with, the same kind of thing. I've noticed that, in the South, more so than where I lived in the North, people here are really big on like hugging you, even if they don't know you. And it makes me extremely uncomfortable. And there are many times I've had to set boundaries with people, letting them know I'm not a touchy-feely person. And you're right, it could potentially wreck the peace, not keep the peace, as you say. I have had that experience before. And then some people, they respond to it just fine. They're kind of, okay.
You're weird, Yeah. So I'm sorry I interrupted you there. Sometimes I'm kind of the same way sometimes. And then, people accept you, but they accept you with a label of you're strange or you're weird. And that's not really nice, It's like, so it's interesting, how they'll accept your boundaries, but it's acceptance at your expense instead of acceptance as an equal. And, I have this thing about shaking hands. I really don't like to shake hands. And it's primarily a health reason. It's not, working in the hospital, we don't shake hands. And, working in that kind of environment, just kind of, Japan, they don't shake hands, they bow. And so in the hospital, people, you just don't shake hands. Some non-medical clinicians like, social workers and stuff like that. And I guess that's maybe not the best. Some clinicians will shake some hands, but it's generally not a widely done practice, and it's sanitation. And it's like, I just don't really want to shake someone's hand. I'd much rather bow or acknowledge a greeting or something like that. And sometimes I'll just say, no, I'd really rather not. And I'll always, sometimes I'll say, well, I just coughed on my hand, whereas most of the time I cough into my elbow, but I'll say, I just coughed on my hand. You don't really want to shake my hand. That usually does a trick. Anybody else? Anything going off in your head about any of this stuff that we've talked about so far? Okay, so looking down the list, we have other things. And don't worry, Neil and Bill, you'll have a chance to talk soon. So we have items of security, items of freedom, items of leisure and relaxation, items of connection, items of mattering, importance, acceptance, care. I mean, I can't say that only as a gay person, but I can say as a gay person, acceptance is a big thing. And, we don't always get it. Recognition, respect. And those are issues that probably all of us have experienced at one time or other. When you go to apply for a job, what are you looking for? You're looking for recognition, acceptance, respect, and there's probably nothing worse than applying for a job and then have the interviewer accuse you of being a baby killer, which happened to me in Hawaii when I went to apply General Electric's small appliance division there in Hawaii. This was during the Vietnam War. And so, to be understood, all of these things to matter are job application, needs. Wouldn't you say there, Neil?
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
Yes, they are definitely needs, right? I mean, I've been through the job interview on both sides quite a bit, and it gets, you have to eat a lot of crow. You have to swallow your tongue a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And that doesn't always feel good, you know?
It can get to the point where sometimes you realize, and this did happen to me once, like you realize this is just not going to work from a cultural, managerial type point of view, not just a technical or whatever point of view.
Yeah. Well, I remember a time, if I can share, that you were submitting applications all over the place. I think I remember, and getting either no comment or rejects, and that eats at one's soul.
It really does. There's a lot of validation that goes on with the job and job search, and even a mild job search is like doing another full-time job on top of your full-time job. So you're putting a lot into that, which is why, I wanted to, when I started this job, I didn't, I don't want to go through that again. I went through that twice within a span of 2 years. It does take a toll.
Yeah, and so, if we look at some of the other needs, if we identify, the thing about this is that we can identify what our needs are in one area, and then if they're not being met, perhaps we can find needs in other areas that can be met. And so self-care, sense of self, self-acceptance, self-knowledge, self-realization. There's a lot of self, making meaning, understanding what your life is about, can help with some of the deficiencies and needs that are not being met in other areas. In a hospital setting where the nurses are just so overloaded and it's nonstop, it never lets up. And the same way with doctors, there is no break between patients, and the days are 10 or 11, 12 hours long, and it just never ends. There's always something that needs to be done. And yes, that's the job, but that's not human. And if your needs are for acceptance, for recognition, for respect, to be heard, as a nurse are not being met, and trust me, nurses are not heard. Doctors frequently are not even heard, not even by the patient, who you think would be listening the most. Don't often hear what the doctors are saying. They conjure up some other thing that the doctor may or may not have said. And that's not necessarily a critique. That's just an example that I've lived through, that I see these needs in this to matter list are not being met, and some of the needs in the connection list are not being met, and certainly some of the needs in leisure relaxation are not being met. And what can we do to help keep ourselves whole? And so we frequently, teaching self-care became a primary topic in the hospital before I left, and as I was leaving, this became a priority issue, self-care, because job burnout exists. It's a real thing, and it exists in all fields. So, meaning, aliveness, challenge, transcendence, beauty, celebration of life, communion. So all of these, and these are not the entire list of needs, but it covers a large area. And anybody see any new words there? I mean, you've seen the word before, but not maybe in this context. Bill. A word here that you'd never really thought about in this way before, or would not roll off the tip of your tongue.
Have patience.
Patience, eh?
Well, no, I'm saying please. I'm asking for patience because I'm not really seeing.
Oh, okay. Yes. You got the time you need.
Yeah, I'm processing the information and just almost throwing a dart at the board here. Self-responsibility under freedom.
Okay.
So would not be one. I would associate freedom with, obviously, if you're not responsible, you lose your freedom, but I wouldn't necessarily associate self-responsibility under freedom.
Okay.
Under a discipline thing for me, and I don't see discipline. Okay, I see the absence of a word here, discipline.
Well, is that, that could be a need, a self-need, and it might be a need that you would see in someone else. I'm wondering if there are other words here that might work, harmony.
Consistency would be one that would fall under discipline pretty well.
Harmony.
Yeah.
Dignity. I mean, I'm not trying to replace the word, but, might there be other words?
Yeah, I would put consistency under discipline, because basically that's what discipline, I guess would put that under one of the...
And that would be your definition of discipline. Discipline is a pretty general word. I mean, discipline can be used by authoritarians to control other people's behavior. Discipline can be used by rebellious people to push back against authoritarian people. So discipline can be only breaking the rules half the time to some people. I'm pretty well disciplined. I only break the rules half the time. I have boundaries. So I think, it's an interesting word, and all of these probably could be looked at from a variety of perspectives. So it's important to know what you mean, and that you are able to define what it is you mean and not leave it too vague so that other people can't wrap their head around it.
Self-responsibility comes to mind right away. That's under freedom. Self-responsibility is probably a more exact definition if I were to use one of those words.
Okay. I mean, you could certainly keep discipline. Just be able to nail it down some. And whose discipline would you be referring to? Because most of these you'll notice are about self, what your needs are. And so if you need to be more disciplined, and that's another way to look at the word, If you need to be more disciplined, then yeah, self-responsibility might be a very good word. Okay. Trey.
Yes. One of the words that pops out at me would be inclusion. It's a word I would almost never use, but I think that it's, you know, a fairly fitting, need in my particular life or circumstances.
So inclusion, again, we can look at this two ways. For you to be more inclusive of other people into your life, or for you to feel more included in other people's lives?
Actually, both.
Okay. And can you say that? Can you articulate that? Can you name that?
Name.
Can you say it?
Can I say that I need to be included in other people's lives?
Yeah.
Yes.
And not just to me, not just to a hypothetical person. And that's the key here. Is part of this nonviolent communication is actually being able to say these things, being able to articulate what your needs are. So, it's one thing to theoretically go around in our head and spin the little clockwork and get the mice and the ants running inside of our neurons and such. It's one thing to do that, and it's another thing to actually tell someone, I'm not feeling included in this conversation. Could we back up here and maybe define some terms, or is there some backstory that that you might need to have to be included, or maybe you want to be a more integral part of the process by maybe having responsibility in the group. If it's a business meeting and you feel left out and you want to be more included, what is it that you're missing? Do you want to feel part of the planning process? Do you want to get the notes early? So being able to articulate, the need, and then what your request is. And we haven't really covered requests, but we're starting to creep into that. Identifying our need first and foremost is important. So thinking back randomly, anybody can anybody think of anything recent in their life? Theoretically, we've been practicing the observation and the feelings. And can you think of any feelings that you've had recently? And if you remember the observation, that's okay. But if you can think of any feelings that you've had, and anything on this needs list that would go with that feeling, maybe either help alleviate it or maybe intensify it. Neil, since you just leaned back in your chair there and got all comfortable, sorry.
I'm thinking, right?
Yeah, I know. It's something to think about. And since this is your first live participation in the event, how about I give you a few minutes to think about that, and we'll call back on Trey.
Okay.
We don't want you to get cold there.
Well, I had just recently reunited with some family I hadn't seen in a long time, and there are lots of feelings that came forth, but one that I would have to say in the very beginning was kind of a feeling of being judged. I felt judged, and because of some words that were said about how I was known, rather than as a human or a cousin, as a particular kind of person. And my need would be probably, along the lines of, to be accepted and to be kind of this, mutually, respected. Respect is important to, be seen as equal, I guess is what I'm trying to say in as few terms as possible.
Yes, you had shared with me privately what the situation was, and I could identify several in there that acceptance, respect, consideration, recognition, to be heard, to be known as Trey Brown and not the other thing, to be understood, And here's one, here they put down both directions of this understanding, to understanding others and to be understood. And a lot of these are bi-directional. Yeah, I mean, that a whole list of things. And so you don't just, verbally vomit over people. You kind of sometimes have to pick out one because people don't often hear 10, so sometimes you have to be able to pick out one and say, I'd really like for you to hear my story, rather than be this other thing. Or, I'd really like to know, does it matter now? What matters, that or me being here? So I'd really like to be heard. I'd like to tell my side of the story and not have you invent my story for me. Yeah. And again, I can't put words in your mouth. These are just some possible suggestions that are going through my head, again, based on what you shared with me prior to our official beginning here. Any of those things stand out or seem like something to work with, some clay to sculpt something new?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm all about trying to figure out ways to communicate more clearly with particularly family, because let's just say my relationships with family have been strained in the past. So yeah, I have a lot to work with here.
Yeah. Okay, Neil, we'll come back to you. I'm just going down the list here. My list, the list of people who signed on.
Well, I think sometimes there's a need to something that is a need further up the chain very early on, is just how you manage a communication need for.
Okay, so I'm looking for personal experience.
I'm getting there.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Well,
it's rather general and directed.
Something that's very common in my own marriage is you talk about the physical needs for rest and sleep or a break, and you're with a partner, and if they're in the same boat, it becomes a competition who can communicate, I'm more tireder than you, right? If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, and you've got children as well that people may or may not know about.
Yeah, so that's what I think when communication becomes a competition, and that that's a really challenging thing that happens in my world.
So I'm wondering, when it becomes a competition, how compromise could be inserted in there. Say, could I just have an hour, and I'll give you an hour, or
well, yeah.
I don't know if that kind of thing would work.
Yeah, it does work sometimes. There's I have found, believe it or not, that when you're in a marriage with the family, or you're in a really close relationship, I don't know if you can see my mouse. It's you go down the pyramid of needs, right? You don't go up, right? Your conflicts are more around things like time, energy, money, shelter,
like budget.
Yeah. So, and a lot of that communication becomes very competitive or accusatory.
And so, thinking about how to, again, going back to the feelings list and fine-tuning our ability to communicate more succinctly and more spot on to our feelings, and be less vague about our feelings, because it's actually in the vagueness that most conflict occurs, because everybody has their own interpretation of what that vague term means. And then identifying more our feelings. And then, of course, we'll get to making the request shortly. But yeah, and then own it. So it's not about in a relationship. It's not about couples. It's about Neil. What do I feel? Not me in comparison to someone else, but just me. Own it yourself. Does that make sense?
Right. I mean, you're still an individual within that relationship.
Yeah, and you cannot speak for the other person, and
you try to, which is hugely,
which isn't always helpful, and it certainly isn't what we're talking about here in nonviolent communication. When we speak for someone else, we're actually violating,
right?
And so owning our own feelings, owning our own observation. Like some of the examples I said, when I heard you say da 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 da, I felt da 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 da. I need da 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 da. Can you do this? Owning what you heard, or sometimes, like another example is when you said da 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 da, I felt da 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 da. I need some clarification. Da 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 da. Could you please help me understand? Is that what you meant? Ask for the clarification that you need before assuming the meaning behind what they said. So this is, again, owning what you heard or what you observed. Say, this I heard, this I saw, this I felt, these are my needs. And then asking for what it is that you need. Do you need clarification? Do you need cooperation? Do you need restating? Do you need, So again, making it personal about yourself. It's hard to do. And in relationship, it's hard to do. Bill, your turn.
Yeah, I don't know if what I've got to contribute right here. I don't know.
I'm sorry, what?
Maybe with what I have to contribute right now is follows under the nonviolent communication, or maybe you can make the link there. But what I have in the past 3 weeks or so, the schedule has been so rough for me that I was wondering how I was going to get through. And like 2 weeks ago, it was like, I have no idea, how I'm going to get through all these work schedules. And the plus side, not only do I get excessively tired, but I lose the ability to think, because my with the autoimmune stuff, you get brain fog. Mm-hmm. And it came to a head yesterday. That was my last day catering. And what had happened was, when you get the brain fog, you literally I went to a gig Friday, which is 3 miles from the house, and basically got lost. Mm-hmm. On a route I take all the time. You stop at a light and have no idea where the hell you are. Yeah. So there's the exhaustion thing. That's just the culmination of all that. And then having to keep promises to other people that that you have while that, one of the promises I made for the gig was, to be prepared for the material, and he gave me the material plenty of time. The gig went fine, but there was the lack of the ability to maintain a promise right there because I was just too busy. Like I said, it went fine just by a little bit of luck and a little bit of skill in hearing things right the first time. But that was the last day of catering. I got an offer at the gym. Like on Tuesday, so the hours would go down, but that was the biggest thing in the past 3 weeks, and how all this is the exhaustion finally. You've been hearing me say for a long time, yeah. I need balance. Yeah. It just.
So sometimes we, frame it a little bit differently. safety. You know, if you're driving, it's like when I ran that stop sign and then hit that car. I mean, it was just a minor thing. And by the time the police got finished writing up the report, because the other person wanted to call the police, which is their right, and I don't blame them. I'm glad that they did. It cost me a ticket for running a stop sign, $128. But when I got done and it was all over with, I mean, okay, this is 2 blocks from the house. It took me 20 minutes to drive home. I was so disoriented.
Yeah.
You know, I drove around the neighborhood trying to figure out, okay, well, which way do I have to turn to get back home? Okay, you know, that's pretty scary. I know I was a little bit more than scared. I was like, my God, I can't find my way home. You know, what's going wrong with me? Am I crazy? So looking at it differently, you have a need for safety.
Yeah.
And,
I did wreck on the last trip that I was going to do catering in a van. And I've been driving panel vans and box trucks with gigs and for other people for 30 years. And yes, the last trip on the last one on wet roads, I had my headlight against somebody's tail light.
okay.
It took an hour for the police to get there, but I called them. But it was the headlight of that panel van to the rear, the tail light there. So
yeah, and so you know when we escalate, you know, sometimes we downplay our needs, and they don't get the priority that they deserve. You know, so it's not really an issue of balance. Balance sort of masks the safety need, you know. So sometimes I recognize that sometimes we don't want to go to the extreme, and I don't think saying that we feel unsafe is all that extreme, but it certainly warrants a little bit more attention than just balance, you know. And sometimes we have to be able to clearly say, this is not safe. This isn't just balance. Okay, the lack of balance in our life, the lack of, you know, balance in the things that we do leads to our lack of safety. But we can die from that, you know. So it's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit more saying that, well, I need to allocate more time to this activity and less to that activity. That's balance requests. When we frame it as safety needs and what requests come from safety, I just can't drive. Right. Or, you know, I especially can't drive at night. I can't drive at night. It's not safe. You know, legally I'm allowed to drive, but I won't drive at night anymore. It's just not safe. I have a need to be safe. I also have a need to keep my expenses down too. But safety is prime priority. Safety, my safety and other people's safety. You know, if I say, oh, well, it's just an inconvenience and I can run to the store, you know, I just catch myself. No, it's not safe. So the safety, you know, escalates the thing a little bit, at least in my situation. And in your situation, it might be wise to think about making that escalation. You know, there's no sense denying when we're not safe. You know, I mean, people die from that. Not to put too much of a damper on it, but you know, when people deny. You know, I mean, I've been mugged, you know, I've been raped. I know when we can lull ourselves into a false sense of security, you know, when we can think we're safe when we're not. I mean, we don't need to live in constant fear. And yet, you know, our society almost warrants it. But anyway, getting back to, I could get off on a big political thing there. Getting back to nonviolent communication. How do we communicate? Sometimes the communication happens to ourselves. You know, we have to understand that sometimes we need to communicate with ourselves. What do you think?
Well, I know the one thing that I have to overcome in my life is the really nasty negative voice. I mean, if you have the voice of your parents in your head, and it's not in my father's voice, okay, and there are a whole lot of things I am over, but yeah, the voice, the inner voice to me is not particularly nice. It's a lot nicer than it was. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not becoming an old bitter man by any stretch of the
Well, I hope not.
imagination. Well, you know, if a lot of people my age and older are bitter.
Yeah, right. It does happen. My
Yeah.
mother was extremely bitter. Oh gosh, you know, there was nothing that she was ever non-judgmental and non-critical about. You know, it's one of my big fears. One of my personal fears is I don't want to be that way. You know, I don't want to be a bitter old lemon. You know, I'd rather be a bright, sunny, wrinkled daisy or something. I don't know. Anyway, that's kind of weird. But you get the idea. You know, I don't want to be an angry old man. You know, I'd just rather be an old fart. You know, an old fuddy-duddy, not be an angry one. But yes, the messages, maybe they're not messages that we can identify a speaker to, but they're certainly messages that we've given ourselves in some way or another, or we've accepted. You know, maybe you had a couple of unsuccessful things, activities that you did. And all of a sudden you're telling yourself that you're no good at it. And nobody told you that, but all of a sudden you've failed at doing something 2 or 3 times, and so you must be no good. And so every time you try it, you fail because you keep hearing this message. We don't, you know, I mean, that's pretty, you know, it's like a lot of the stuff that I responded to in my growing up years was in response to the 5-year-old who was never listened to, who was always shut down, who was always told that he was no good. And sometimes, you know, you have to listen to that. I mean, the therapy that I took, the internal family system therapy, you know, the practice is to honor that voice, to listen to what it's saying. And, you know, when I teach meditation to people who got over anxious minds and who are constantly thinking, and, you know, especially with dealing with addictions, people with addictions, and in the detox unit, I would lead meditation, and people say, you know, well, I just got all these thoughts. And so, you know, sometimes we just have to invite the thoughts and say, you know, I hear you. And right now I'm meditating, and can I come back to you in 5 minutes? Can you give me 5 minutes of meditation time? And then I'll be able to address you fully. And people would kind of laugh. But when they would do it, when they would say, yes, okay, I know you need to think about knitting right now. I know that yarn color is very important. It's very important to you right now. But if you give me 5 minutes of meditation, then I can give you my whole undivided attention, and we can decide on the color of yarn for the sweater that I'm going to knit. That may sound ludicrous, but it's a very real example.
Actually,
yes.
I actually have an example. There was a gig, and I've done gigs for a lot of, you know, big ones quite often. There was one where it was up in Kannapolis, and that one was actually for 20,000 people, and it was a much more intimate band setting. And what had happened was I was kind of like walking off my own, and I was really you get a case of the nerves where my hands are going like this before I play. And the oddest thing was in a Tom Waits voice, it just something going on in my head. Here comes Tom Waits, and it's like, hey, Bill, it's our old buddy stage fright. Let's go to the gig. And my hands went like this. And I was just like, because all those things to click in my head to calm me down. After I heard that, it was kind of like, okay, this is just energy I need to not make mistakes.
Yeah.
It was an example just like you gave, just one of those things that clicked into my head, and I've used it ever since. So it kind of works to old buddy stage fright.
So, honoring ourselves, saying, I'm a person I need to listen to sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes we need to listen and say, that's a lie, or that's not true. There's no reason why I can't do that. There might be like, okay, I could not go out and perform as Bill. And there's it's not because I might not be capable, it's because I don't have the practice. So there's some very good legitimate reasons why I could not do it. But in theory, there's nothing that says that I couldn't have done it. So, I play guitar, not like Bill, not near how Bill can play, but I play guitar. So, theoretically it's possible I can play guitar. That doesn't make us equal, but it certainly invalidates any message that I couldn't play guitar or I couldn't perform. I've performed on my flute. I've performed with my guitar, not the 20,000 people. So, the messages that my parents told me of, you're no good, you can't play. I played clarinet with jazz bands in New Orleans. So the messages that my parents wanted me to hear that I was never good enough have certainly been invalidated many times. It's taken practice for me to quit listening to them. They're still there. They're still the 5-year-old child that has been told so many times that he's deficient in so many different ways. And so sometimes I just have to say, I hear you. And, I'm not a 5-year-old child anymore, and I will protect you. I'm a 67-year-old bent up old man, and I'll stand up for you. Anyway, so listening to ourselves. Sometimes we have these nonviolent communications with ourselves. Okay, final thoughts, everyone, and then we will, what time is it? I can't tell. I don't have
a little after 11.
Yeah, a little after 11. So a couple more minutes, we'll wrap it up, and then we'll do Jigage and Odaimoku.
I was going to add something, if that's all right.
Yes, yes. Can you move closer to your microphone?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to figure out what's going on with that.
It may be just me,
What I was going to share is that over this last visit I had with my cousin, her and I had entered into dialogue about some of this very topic. We were talking about we would never allow other people to talk to us the way that we talk to ourselves.
Yeah.
And it made me start thinking in a whole different way, because now I'm thinking, I wouldn't let somebody else say this to me without,
Good point.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
our parents could talk to us that way.
Yeah.
But, and that's a good point. When you're talking to yourself, ask yourself, would I let somebody else say that to me?
Right.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. And then going to nonviolent communication, how would we talk to ourselves? Again, you'd have to think of some examples, but, for myself, I'm just trying to think of something off the top of my head. Well, it's not coming to me, and I want to give my undivided attention to Neil.
I'm not the best person for undivided attention.
Would you allow somebody else to talk to you that way?
I don't know, probably. I was just, something about self-talk and those unmet needs, right? I was listening to a podcast by I was apparently doing a lot of research this weekend, and I didn't even know it. A friend of mine sent me a podcast by Gabriel Mate, and I was listening to it while I went to sleep. And I woke up with 5 minutes left. So that was the part I actually listened to. And he was talking about, he's making kind of this statement that if you have an addictive problem, you know, there's some unmet need from, he was really going back to very Freudian kind of, there's something from your childhood that, you know, you're not addressing. There's not a part of you that you're not listening to, right? Yeah. He's saying whatever that addiction may be, and he, you know, street drugs, food, you know, sex, whatever, right?
And in his case, classical music CDs.
I missed that part.
Oh, right. I don't know that he, in his book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, he talks about his own addiction.
Right.
And the ridicule that he's experienced when he shares his addiction. And yet, you know, his thing is, his addiction is addiction.
Right.
So maybe in an email you could share me the link to that podcast. I'm a big fan of Gabriel Maté.
Yeah, no, it was my first real exposure to him.
Yeah.
And I was like really impressed.
Yeah. Yeah. So just some background information, since I've mentioned his name. He wrote a book many years ago called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And it's about addictions. And it's an excellent book. It's kind of a bridge between bedside reading and exciting reading. It's kind of in three parts. There's the clinical stuff, there's the research stuff, there's the case studies, and then there's new ideas. And so it's, you know, to me, I just found the whole thing was exciting. Probably because I was working with the detox unit at the time, and it was, you know, I was doing an internship, and it was an area of specialty study. So anyway, Gabriel Maté is, or I don't know if he still is, but last I knew of him, he was, he's a doctor, he's an MD, and he has a kind of like a free clinic in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Right.
East Side, which is notorious for drugs. And he has been a big advocate for harm reduction. And you know, that's safe injection sites, you know, drug analysis to see if it's, you know, got harmful ingredients, and, you know, with no questions asked. Treatment for whatever ails you without any requirement that you do some sort of behavior modification. You know, if you've got abscess from injecting drugs, we'll treat the abscess and we won't make the moral judgment about, you know, we hope that you quit injecting drugs, but we're not going to require it. And that was one of my pushbacks in the hospital when physicians or nurses would say they're drug seeking. And I would push back on that there's no medical diagnosis for drug seeking. That is a moral judgment. That's an opinion, but it's not a medical diagnosis. And you can't enter that into, I mean, there's no way you can enter that into a medical record because it's not based on medical fact. There's no diagnosis. There's no insurance billing code, right, which is key. So anyway, so Gabriel Maté does these things, and he himself in the book Realm of Hungry Ghosts talks about his addiction, and which was for classical music CDs, spending $30,000 in a day on classical music CDs that he would never listen to.
You can't.
Leaving his 5-year-old child locked in a car unattended all day long on the streets of Vancouver while he's shopping for classical music CDs. So the behaviors of an addict are one thing, and that's one thing you focus on, is changing the behaviors. It's the behaviors that most of us don't like. And I'm extrapolating a little bit with including other people's ideas about addictions. It's, you know, people really don't give a crap whether you're taking heroin or cocaine or, you know, I mean, yes, they will say that, and it is physically harmful. But most of the time, people are most irritated about the behavior.
Right.
You know, I mean, they don't like your irresponsibility. They don't like your mood swings. If you're an alcoholic, they don't like you pissing all over the place or, you know, stumbling or banging things up.
Yeah, which brings us back to the, Bill was talking about Tom Waits, and I'm just like, yeah, he made a whole career out of singing about that.
I don't know. I don't know him. So, yeah. So, little background story that I didn't know about. Yeah. So, I mean, there's two, when I work with people with addictions, I would wish that they weren't addicted to that. I know that they'll be addicted to something. And really, what's the issue here? The issue is behavior. How do we work with the behavior? I would hope that people aren't going to be addicted to something. But the reality is that people are. And how do we work with their behavior without condemning them? How do we enable? So I'm getting off subject here. Let's go back to. We can talk about this someplace else. Let's go back to nonviolent communication. How do we communicate nonviolently with ourselves and with others? So any final thoughts from anybody? I'm just going to say thank you all, and I hope it's. Oh, pardon me. I hope it's been beneficial. Today we got kind of all over the place. And I imagine next week we will too when we talk about requests. Yes, Bill.
There was just one observation, what you did to my question. I said I had no idea how you were going to bring this around to nonviolent communication. And I think one little observation or thought about how you did that would be looking at the three ways, like what the reason we do the 10 suchness is 3 times. It's 3 different viewpoints of the same thing. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All of this is very Buddhist. We're not using Buddhist words when we talk about nonviolent communication, but they are, when I first learned about this, 8, 9, I think maybe 8, 9 years ago. Wow. Okay, this is the how-to for the Eightfold Path. Okay, the Eightfold Path is great idea,
Right.
But then how do you do it? It's like, okay, yeah, how do you skillfully livelihood? How do you do skillful livelihood, especially in today's society? How do you have skillful mindfulness? How do you have skillful speech? And so, yes, we know the goal, but how do we get there? And the goal is to speak skillfully, and that's a really great goal. But most of us can't figure out how to get there. We don't have the tools for how to do that, and the nonviolent communication, I think, are the excellent tools to help us get to right speech, right thought, right action, right mindfulness. They're the little incremental steps that gives us the how-to accomplish those things. So that's just my thinking. Yes, and, so we have the benefit, we have the reward, we have the manifest, all in the 10 suchnesses too. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time. Bill, are you teaching today?
Yeah, so I will very quietly shut the door.
Okay, yes. Yes, so,
thank you. I really, these talks are really, really important and clear up so much that.
Well, I hope so. That's my ultimate wish, is that they are beneficial to all of us. It's beneficial to me. It's like I said, if you can't teach somebody when you're practicing this, teach somebody. You'll learn it even more better. That's such a way of phrasing it. You'll learn it better. Teach somebody. And Trey, did you pick up any of the Terry Pratchett books?
Yes, I did get Guards. I have not started it yet, though.
Okay. I was just curious.
But I did get a copy I think yesterday it came in the mail, or yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I read the whole Masquerade yesterday, but just the entire book. So I get them on the Kindle because they're a little bit cheaper. And if I had the hard copies, I'd have a stack of them. So anyway, okay, enough diversion. All right, so I'm gonna turn on the candles here. Again, this is my personal altar downstairs. It's in my personal space, and I just thought I finally got it so that I was kind of cleared away, and I could share that with you. And I'm going to, for clarification for the recording, that is the prism mandala, and there is the, get out of the way, but I have to see what I'm showing you. The two Buddhas side by side, and Nichiren in the front. Again, I have to see what I'm showing you. And it's probably not coming out very clear, and you can just blame that on me because I'm fuzzy. And the prism mandala there, okay? And in so the cloth covering up the clutter underneath in this house. So I have to put stuff. And the mannequin, and so that tapestry was given to me when a young boy was born in Charlotte, and he's Japanese, and I helped his parents along the process, navigating some of, not a lot, but a little bit of American medicine. And this was years ago, about 17, 18 years ago, maybe 20 now. And so they gave me that banner, and so I had it framed as a little boy looking through a noden, which are the Japanese curtains. Okay, enough of that. All right, so if everybody will turn off their cameras, and the reason why I'm moving around is because I'm on a bouncy ball to help the posture and stuff, or at least that's the theory. And sit off to the side, and hopefully you can see. Oh, I'm going to turn the recording off now. Okay, thanks for watching.